Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Natalia Leigh and I'm an indie author and freelance editor, and today I'm sharing 5 mistakes that I often see writers, usually new writers but not always, but 5 mistakes that I see writers making in the very first chapter of their novel that can usually cause readers to just close the book and move on to something else. So I'm going to go over these 5 mistakes today. Hopefully try to help you avoid these mistakes in your own novels and your own writing. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about what not to do in the first chapter of your book, then keep watching. Let's get started. The first mistake that I see so many writers make is too much backstory and too much info dumping in the very first chapter. Now, the reason I think this happens is because we are, stepping foot into a new world and into a brand new story. And the author, especially if the author is a brand new author, somebody who's kind of new to writing, this author wants us to understand everything. They want to make sure that we're not confused. We know everything about the world. We know the character's entire backstory. And essentially, they're trying to get us caught up to chapter 1. But when this happens, chapter 1 is almost reading like a prologue that's giving us all the backstory. And this might sound a little harsh, but when a new reader picks up your book for the very first time, they don't care about your character. Not yet. They don't care about the character. They don't care about the world. They don't care about your character's backstory. They need to get to know your character before they want to know about the tragic past, before they want to know the history of the war, before they want to know everything that happened to lead your character up to this point. So I see this all the time because writers want to make sure that readers are caught up and they know what's going on, but like that backstory and that info dumping that you just like drop on your reader right away, that can make us just want to close the book. Because when I open the book to learn about a character and suddenly you're giving me like the entire history of the world, or you're giving me all these flashbacks about this woman and what happened in her, previous marriage, I have already lost interest because I don't care about her previous marriage yet. And I also don't care about the history of the world and the wars that were going on yet. We will care later on, which is why you should take all of this backstory and all of this info that you need to get to your readers, but you want to take all of that and weave it into the story naturally instead of dropping it on us all at once. The second mistake that I often see in first chapters, too many characters and too many places, and all of the names are just swimming around, and I can't keep this character from this character. I don't know this town, from this province, from this city, from this kingdom, just too much. And this kind of goes along with the too much backstory, too much info dumping, but in the same vein, it's too many characters. And even if you have a novel that has a very large cast of characters, again, when I am first stepping into the book, I'm already disoriented and I need to start off slowly. So you don't want to introduce 5 characters right off the bat and hit the readers with all of them at once, because it's going to be difficult to tell those characters apart. It's going to be difficult to pick up on their unique voices and the way, the unique ways that they see the world. Same thing with places. If you just drop 5 names on me, here are the 5 kingdoms of the north or whatever, I'm not going to be able to remember those because I have no context for the importance and the meaning in each of those locations. And one more thing that I want to mention is that sometimes authors try to kind of bulk up their world by dropping all of these names on their readers, but also keep in mind that if these places are not going to come up again, or if these characters are not going to come up again, we do not need to know the names of these characters and these places. So if this is your first chapter and your main character is sitting down at the coffee shop and they're getting coffee from the barista who we will never see again, that barista does not need to be named Jenny or whatever her name is, because we're never going to see her again, right? We don't need to know the names of all of these characters. We just need to be introduced to your main character and start learning about them in the first chapter before you kind of open the door for us and allow us to step into the rest of the world and start meeting all of the other characters. Okay, moving on to mistake number 3, and this is probably the one that's going to upset you the most, because We're going to talk about overused cliches in the first chapter. And whenever I talk about these, people get really defensive. And it's probably because you've written this first chapter, you think it's absolutely amazing, and maybe it is. And then I'm like, hey, here's an overused cliche. And you look at that amazing, perfect chapter that you've written, and there it is. There's the cliche that I just mentioned not to use. So if you have one of these cliches in your first chapter, maybe think about if there's a new way that you could write this chapter, if you could put a unique spin on it that's totally unique to your story and your character, you could do that. That would be awesome. Or you can just keep your first chapter the way it is. Remember, I'm not here to tell you how to write your book. This is your story and your book at the end of the day, but I am here to hopefully kind of open your eyes to cliches, to mistakes, etc. So you have to be the one who decides what you want in your first chapter. But that aside, okay, some of the cliches that I've seen in first chapters, and that I know you guys have too, because these are all over. You could probably list them with me. One is waking up in the morning. And I feel like this is a common one because especially as new writers, it's like, okay, it's the start of a new day. It's the start of a new story. It's the start of a new book, first chapter. I feel like the character should just be waking up and then, you get to follow them throughout their day. So I see that often. And another one I see that kind of goes along with this, dream sequences. And dream sequences can be very disorienting for your reader. When I pick up a book, I don't want to immediately be confused. I don't want to be thrown into a dream sequence only to realize that it's a dream and have the character wake up later and then we're in a totally different place and I have to kind of like reorient myself. And I think dream sequences have also often been used to infuse relatively low stakes drama, I would say, like low stakes drama, low stakes tension. And you guys are gonna know this next one. You're gonna know. The next one is looking into a mirror to describe themselves. Now, I feel like we have all done this because it's the easiest way for new writers, at least, to get description across. Looking in a mirror or a reflective surface. Maybe they're looking in a still lake or a shattered looking glass, I don't know. But they're looking into some sort of reflective surface and the character is telling us what they look like. I have seen this so many times that every time this comes up in a client's work, I will immediately point it out because it feels so overdone. It feels so overdone, so overused, super cliche, and those are not the vibes that you want to be giving your readers immediately upon them opening your book and reading chapter 1. All right, mistake number 4 that I often see in first chapters is going to be a little bit more difficult to just put your finger on, and you might need help from beta readers or critique partners with this one, and it's just that the chapter is too slow and nothing is really happening. Your first chapter is supposed to hook your readers. You want to give them just enough information to get them kind of intrigued and curious, introduce them to your main character, kind of introduce them to, the world, but you don't want to overdo it with too much backstory, and you don't want to kind of underdo it and be underwhelming so that when your reader, reaches chapter 2, they're like, wow, that was the most boring first chapter I have ever read, and I don't care about this character or this story at all. And then they just close your book. No matter what genre you're working within, there is conflict and there is tension. And I have talked about this. I talked about this in a previous video about mistakes that I see new writers make, and that is a lack of tension, a lack of stakes, a lack of goals. And readers can feel that even in the first chapter. So if there is nothing happening, if there is no intrigue, there is no action, there is no reason to continue on with this story and with your character, then readers probably aren't going to. And again, this one can be a little bit more difficult to put your finger on. It's not as simple as, oh, look, my character's looking in a mirror. Let me rewrite this in a more unique way. It's more, okay, is this intriguing to readers? Are they curious? Do they want to keep reading more? And often you have to actually give it to readers and get feedback in order to figure out whether or not that first chapter is working. Going along with this, I also want to mention that I don't want you to get hung up on the first chapter and get so intimidated and overwhelmed that you're like, wow, I just cannot write a first chapter. My recommendation is to write your first draft as quickly as possible. I always outline, so I'd recommend outlining, writing your first draft as quickly as possible, and then returning to the first chapter and going over these mistakes, trying to learn how do I write a more gripping chapter, and then editing and reworking instead of just getting stuck and feeling like I'm too scared, I'm too intimidated, I have no idea what to do, because then you won't finish the rest of your book. Okay, the fifth and final mistake that I'm going to mention today in terms of mistakes that I see in the first chapter of novels is that the first chapter reads like a list. And usually this mistake goes along with like a cliche mistake of waking up in the morning. So it would be like a mixture of cliche and a list in terms of character wakes up, character takes a shower, character looks in the mirror, character goes downstairs, then they get breakfast, and then they get in their car, and then they close the door, and then they drive somewhere, and then they get out of the car, and you get the idea here. And again, I think this comes back to writers, especially new writers, wanting their audience and their readers to perfectly picture everything that's happening. So they're trying to kind of, take your hand and lead you through every single action of this character. And that to me is not a story. That is just a list. Like it might as well be, stage directions or something for actors in a play, because that's how it feels. I don't feel like I'm seeing the story play out. I don't feel like I'm getting to know the characters. This can also go along with show versus tell, which is another topic that I want to make a video on. That's a big one. So all of these little things are kind of coming to play. So I can list out these 5 mistakes, and I do hope that it's helpful for you. But also at the end of the day, there are so many other things that come into play. Show versus tell, allowing readers to get to know your character without dumping too much backstory on them, your narrative style and your voice, which I need to make an entire video on. Now that we're at the end of all the mistakes that I've seen, I think it would be helpful before you sit down to write your chapter, or even after. Let's say you've written your entire novel and you're coming back to your first chapter and you're ready to start editing it, ask yourself, what is the purpose of this first chapter? Some basic ones that we kind of expect to see in first chapters are an introduction to the character and an introduction to the world without backstory or info dumping, potentially getting an introduction to like a little bit of a theme. A big one, a really big one, is that your first chapter is essentially setting the reader up for expectations. So if somebody is coming into your novel and they read the first chapter and it is absolutely hilarious and you're super clever and you have this really fun, like unique humor, and they're like, oh my gosh, I absolutely love that. And then they get to chapter 2 and then suddenly it becomes this really like dark, somber, like mystery thriller or something, they're going to be completely thrown off. So when I say that your first chapter is setting up reader expectations, that's what I mean. So the first chapter is also doing that. It's setting up kind of the tone and the feel for what readers can expect throughout the rest of the novel. If you think of one of your favorite authors, one of mine is Leigh Taylor, for example. Greg and I are listening to Daughter of Smoke and Bone on audiobook right now and loving it. Leigh Taylor is magical. That is like the perfect way for me to describe what I expect out of her books, is a feeling of magic, and she always delivers on that. From chapter 1 to chapter 50, or however many chapters are in this book, she always delivers the magic. And I expect that from her. And readers will be expecting something from you based on what you put in your first chapter. So that's a big one to consider. And I really think that stepping away from your chapter and asking yourself, what is my purpose here? What am I trying to do? And what am I really trying to communicate to readers? That will help you when you're ready to go back and either start rewriting it or start editing it, or maybe just write it for the first time. If you're somebody that's outlining and you really want to kind of prepare first, that's cool. I'm a plotter, I'm an outliner, and I like to prepare as well. But if you're a pantser and you just want to write the whole book first and then come back, that's all good. It's just this work can be done either beforehand or in editing, and absolutely in editing. Let's say most of this work is done in editing. So if you're, looking back at your first chapter and you are seeing some of these mistakes and errors, don't get overwhelmed. And I'm going to continue saying this in all my videos because I know how it feels to watch a writing tips video or a writing mistakes video and be like, oh my God, I made all of those mistakes. I was a beginner writer. I still have so much to learn, along my writing journey. I am not perfect in any way, but I have learned along the way. And now I can share that information with you. But if you are just now starting your journey, maybe you're on your second or your third book, and you're finally starting to pick up on these things, Do not get overwhelmed if you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm making all the mistakes, because believe me, all of us make all the mistakes. So do not get discouraged. Is just the bottom line here. So thank you guys so much for watching. I always take video requests. So if you have any comments or questions or suggestions for upcoming videos, please leave them in the comments down below. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I am a freelance editor. I specialize in copy editing, and I have also been taking classes in developmental editing. I'm about to move into the advanced classes through the Editorial Freelancers Association. I offer manuscript critiques and all types of other really helpful editing and critique services. So if you're looking to get some extra professional eyes on your novel, if you're getting ready to publish and you need it to have that like final polish, let me know. You can click on the link at the end of the video. It'll pop up right here to navigate to my website, enchantedinkpublishing.com. I would love to work with you if you think that I would be a good fit for your project. So thank you guys so much for watching today. I appreciate you, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!